I still remember the exact moment when my life changed forever. The violent sound of metal grinding, glass shattering, and the desperate cry of my baby. I was sobbing in the driver's seat, my hands trembling so badly I could barely breathe. Just minutes before the crash, I had called the only people I believed I could rely on: my parents. My daughter Emma was only a few weeks old, tiny and fragile, and I was begging them for help. But instead of caring for their own grandchild, they chose to turn away. My mother sighed heavily and said words that carved themselves into my memory like a scar. "Your sister needs us more right now. Don't drag us into your problems." In that moment, something inside me broke. I realized something terrifying. To them, my child didn't matter. What they didn't know was that years later, they would stand at my door, desperate and broken, asking me for the very help they once denied. And when that day came, everything they believed in would collapse. Before I go on, take a moment to stay with this story, because situations like this happen more often than anyone admits. Sometimes the truth deserves to be heard, no matter how uncomfortable it is. My name is Sarah. Years ago I was a young single mother living in a small apartment on the edge of a noisy city. Emma had just been born. She was perfect in every way, the only light in a life that often felt dark and uncertain. Her father disappeared the moment he learned about my pregnancy, leaving me alone with fear, responsibility, and endless sleepless nights. I kept telling myself that even if I had no partner, at least I had my parents. That illusion didn't last long. In our family there had always been a favorite, my younger sister Vanessa. In their eyes she could do no wrong. When she quit college they said she was searching for herself. When she crashed their car, they bought her a new one without hesitation. When she lost job after job, they quietly paid her rent and told everyone she was just misunderstood. But whenever I asked for help, excuses appeared like shadows. Still, when Emma was born, I allowed myself to hope. I thought becoming grandparents might soften their hearts. I was painfully naive. One exhausting morning I had to cross the city for a doctor's appointment. Anyone who has cared for a newborn understands how those early weeks blur together: the constant crying, the anxiety, the bone-deep fatigue. Emma had been restless for hours. Before leaving, I called my mother. My voice was shaking as I asked if she could watch Emma for just a few hours. There was silence on the line, heavy and cold. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "Vanessa has had a difficult week. We promised to take her shopping today." I blinked in disbelief. I reminded her this was her granddaughter. Her voice hardened. "You chose to have this child. It's not our responsibility." Those words hurt more than anything else. I hung up, swallowing tears, strapped Emma into her car seat, and drove off alone. About 20 minutes later, everything went wrong. A truck ran a red light. In the next second my car spun across the intersection like it was weightless. When it finally stopped, smoke was pouring from under the hood. My head was pounding, my vision blurred, but then I heard Emma crying behind me. That sound gave me strength. She was alive. That was all that mattered. Paramedics arrived quickly and rushed us to the hospital. Emma was unharmed except for fright, but I had a broken arm and a concussion. Lying in that sterile room, surrounded by machines and fear, I called my parents again. I thought maybe this time they would understand. I told my mother I had been in an accident. There was a pause, then she asked in an irritated tone if I was serious. She said Vanessa was having a nervous breakdown and needed emotional support. I explained that I just needed someone to stay with Emma overnight. My mother sighed loudly and repeated that they couldn't come. No concern. No comfort. Only distance. I ended the call feeling completely alone. But that night something unexpected happened. A little before evening, an elderly man walked into my hospital room. It was my grandfather. He looked furious. He told me my mother had claimed everything was fine. When I explained what had really happened, his jaw tightened. He sat beside me and gently lifted Emma into his arms. He whispered that she was beautiful. Then he looked at me with a determination I had never seen before and promised he would take care of everything. Over the next few days he did more for me than anyone ever had. He took Emma home while I recovered. He brought groceries to my apartment. He even helped cover some of my medical bills. What I didn't realize at the time was that he had started asking questions about our family. The answers shocked him. My parents had been telling relatives they were struggling financially because of me. They claimed they were constantly helping their irresponsible daughter. In truth, they had never supported me at all. Every spare cent went to Vanessa. My grandfather was outraged, but he didn't confront them immediately. Instead, he made a quiet decision that would only be revealed years later. Life moved forward. I worked endlessly to provide for Emma. There were nights when I cried from exhaustion, ready to give up, but every time I looked at her face, I found the strength to continue. Meanwhile, my parents barely spoke to me. They were too busy rescuing Vanessa from the consequences of her own choices. Time passed. Emma grew into a smart, kind, extraordinary little girl. Slowly my life began to change. I started a small online shop selling handmade jewelry. At first I earned almost nothing, but with patience and determination, the business grew. Orders began arriving from across the country. By the time Emma turned 10, my income was greater than anything I had ever imagined. I bought a beautiful home in a quiet neighborhood. Emma had her own room, a spacious backyard, and the childhood I had always wanted for her. For years my parents remained distant. Then one day my phone rang unexpectedly. It was my mother. I almost ignored the call, but curiosity won. Her voice sounded strained, desperate. She said we needed to talk. I asked what she wanted. After hesitating, she admitted my father had lost his job. Vanessa was drowning in debt. They might lose their house. I stayed silent, waiting for the words I knew were coming. Finally she asked if I could help them. In that instant, memories flooded back, the hospital room, my arm in a cast, Emma crying, and my mother's cold refusal. I took a deep breath and calmly invited them to dinner. 2 days later they arrived at my home, stunned by what they saw. The large house, the safe neighborhood, Emma laughing in the living room. During dinner my mother kept glancing around nervously. Vanessa looked annoyed, as if my success offended her. Eventually my father cleared his throat and mentioned their financial situation. I stood up, went to the kitchen, and returned with a folder. Inside were legal documents. I placed them on the table and asked if they remembered my grandfather. They nodded slowly. I told them that before he passed away, he had changed his will. Everything he owned, his savings, investments, and countryside property, had been left to Emma. Not to them. Not to Vanessa. Only to the child they once dismissed. My parents stared at the papers in disbelief. I told them something my grandfather had whispered shortly before his death. People who abandon family do not deserve to benefit from it later. Vanessa's face turned red with anger. She demanded to know if I was truly refusing to help. I looked at her calmly and repeated the same words my mother had once said to me. You chose your life. It is not my responsibility. Silence filled the room. At that moment Emma walked in and wrapped her arms around me, asking sweetly if we could have dessert now. I smiled and said yes. As my parents sat there in stunned quiet, I realized something important. The greatest revenge is not hurting those who hurt you. Sometimes it is simply building such a full, peaceful life that they finally understand they no longer belong in it. And that is exactly what I chose to do.